Rolling. Forgot to press record on that.
That's
Would have been a nightmare.
the sort of thing I would do.
Yeah, exactly. I looked at it. I was like, cool. Oh, man. We're going to have to start again.
That's fine.
So thank you for being here, Rebecca.
Sure.
I don't know what is going to happen now with this podcast, but I'm hoping that I can learn a lot from this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a topic that's like, it's been very close to me as well, close to my heart. One of my friends was going through a very difficult time. And that's when I realized that this is not a joke. It's not a fake thing that people are making up.
Sure.
This is an actual serious issue that's been going on
Yeah.
in the world. So I just wanted to talk to you generally about mental health. And then you as a psychotherapist as well. You've got your professional point of view that we can hear. And then, just want to help people that are watching, you know, to gain some knowledge as well and see how they can deal with it.
Yeah.
What they can do and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it should be good.
Of course.
How are you anyway?
I'm good. Yeah. Yeah. This is an interesting format. I'm excited.
Yeah, exactly. Just tell us about yourself first, what you did, and you studied in the US for some time.
Yes. Yeah. I have quite a mixed background in terms of education. So I did my undergraduate degree in America as a international student, and I did a bachelor's degree in psychology over there. Loved it, really enjoyed it, and then came back here and did a master's degree in mental health and psychological therapies at Queen Mary University in London. And around that time, I was kind of in what I wanted to do next. They have a wonderful clinical psychology doctorate program here in the UK that is funded through the NHS. So that I was initially considering. And so I went into a placement over here as an assistant psychologist. So I worked in the National Health Service for a year in a split placement between forensic psychology and a health psychology area, basically chronic pain. And then around that time, I kind of made the decision that actually I wanted to pursue life overseas in the States. So I moved over there. And that was when I decided to pursue going into private practice, being an individual counselor or therapist. And the process for doing that in the States is you have to become what's called, at least in the state that I was living in, an LPC or a licensed professional counselor. Gotcha. So I had to get all of my transcripts and everything accredited and approved over there. And then I had to start a 3-year supervised placement. So I worked at an inpatient treatment facility for 3 years, where I was assessing people who were in crisis. So
this was in the hospital or?
Both, yeah. Both. So we had an inpatient facility where people could just walk in and say they were in crisis, and we would assess them and determine what level of care they needed. But I also did shifts at the hospital. So I would be in A&E waiting for people to show up who had a kind of primary mental health diagnosis. And then I would work with them directly to determine, did they need to go inpatient? Could we do outpatient services for them? How critical essentially was their need. So I did that for 3 years, and then once I did that, took my exam and everything, I was a licensed professional counsellor, and then I went into private practice. So I've been in private practice since 2018. Wow. And I then became the director of my location, and then I now still continue to work for that company overseas. So I have some US clients that still see me virtually here. Yeah. While I'm here, but I also started my own company to see people individually. Yeah. So I kind of juggle the both.
That's pretty interesting. Is there a particular reason that you studied your discipline, what you studied, or is it something that you thought would be interesting?
Yeah, I took one class. I took one psychology class because in the States, when you get your bachelor's degree, you don't just sign on to a course and do that course the full 3 years. You basically collect credits. Yeah. And you have to collect a certain number of credits in a subject area to have a degree in that area. So I took one psychology class and I was just hooked. I mean, I was just fascinated by human behavior. Yeah. How we construct our reality, how we do life, the neuroscience, the neurobiology behind it. So there was never a class I took in psychology that felt like a pain to take. I just loved it. So it was really that passion that just kind of kept directing me to where I was meant to be. Yeah, that's
one side, isn't it? There's education that has one side, and then there's a compassion side as well that you have to develop. what did you develop that? And because
Yeah.
it's like you have to talk to people and try to
Yeah.
understand them. So the
Yeah.
compassion aspect is needed, isn't it?
Yes. So, as part of your fundamental training in psychology, and generally it's something that's kind of covered in Psychology 101, really, is the different theoretical approaches.
Gotcha.
Carl Rogers, I believe, if I'm kind of pulling back into my brain correctly, he was one of the very kind of early psychotherapists, psychologists who kind of informed a lot of what we do today. He coined this notion of unconditional positive regard.
Okay.
That you should have unconditional positive regard for your clients, that whatever they come to you with, whatever they come to you saying, your regard for them should be positive always. They should never be made to feel ashamed by you or embarrassed, right? Or bad. That everything that they come with, we come from a place of that this is somebody who's just trying to get through the day and they're trying to survive and they're trying to do the best they can.
Yeah.
And that was something that always stuck with me and has truly not just been something I try to implement, but at my core, I do. Everybody that I speak to, I have unconditional positive regard for. And I truly believe that they wouldn't be coming to see me if they didn't want to feel better, right? Or do better or just feel happier. And so we're looking to explore what is it that they're not happy with or happy about, but it is never about them at their core or who they are as a human, right? That is, you are fundamentally a wonderful person. And that is just the lens that I meet people through. So that compassion comes easily when you just see everyone as inherently good, like everyone's good. And I know that's kind of controversial to some people and they say, well, people have done these terrible things and awful things, but again, and we can kind of get into this later, but I work from a trauma-informed standpoint. So I'm looking at everything we do to try to keep us safe. So even the most maladaptive behaviors, right, whether that be addiction issues or, abuse, right, exactly. We would still look at that through the lens of how did this person learn that was what they had to do to survive, right, or to feel good. So, shaming the behavior, critiquing the behavior is never going to make someone feel comfortable being vulnerable, right? It's going to make them kind of cave inwards. So establishing that therapeutic rapport and then allowing that client to really recognize that unconditional positive regard, which might be the first time they've ever felt that in their life. That is just the absolute foundation to a strong therapeutic relationship, and then somebody feeling comfortable and safe to do that explorative work.
Yeah, that's interesting, very interesting. And what I saw on your credentials was EMDR. It's a mouthful for me to say, and I'm not going to attempt to say this because I tried a couple of times and what is that?
EMDR is the abbreviation for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is a therapeutic approach that was developed by someone called Francine Shapiro, who is a wonderful human being who unfortunately passed away just a couple of years ago. But she developed this approach essentially as a way of healing trauma. So what we know about the brain, first of all, let me say this. Trauma, as we used to define it, we used to think of trauma as military, right? Veterans, first responders, that we could look at something and say, oh my gosh, that person's had so much trauma, experienced so much trauma. What we have come to know in the last 20, 30 years or so is that trauma exists outside of just those big moments. We would call those big T trauma, major developmental moments that anyone would look at and say, that was traumatic. We also now identify what we call small t or little t trauma, which is more developmental trauma. It's more the little things that happened over the course of your life. Perhaps, your parents divorcing, or perhaps, you grew up with a parent that experienced, alcoholism, or perhaps you moved a whole bunch of times, or any kind of little innocuous moments that perhaps to the outsider might not have seemed really significant, but to that little person, it flooded their nervous system, and it taught them something about themselves and the world that was really fundamentally not true. So whether that be, I'm not safe, I'm not good enough, right? Whatever that kind of belief is of self. So trauma is any time the nervous system is overwhelmed or flooded with emotions and sensations. So I mean, I could probably identify a couple times in the last month where my nervous system has been overwhelmed. The vast majority of those moments get processed out naturally through the body. So if you ever have an experience where you just feel really kind of activated and lit up, but you go to bed and the next day you feel a little bit better, right? It doesn't impact you so much. That's your body and your brain doing what it knows how to do. It's processing out that experience. There are some moments in time that don't get processed out. And we know that they don't, because if you were to think of them, your body responds like it's happening all over again.
Yeah.
Those are the moments in time that we know.
And people get panic attack and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So a panic attack be a perfect example of that. The body is responding to something that happened in the past.
Yeah.
Right. It's not necessarily responding to something that is a danger in the present moment, but the body remembers.
Yeah.
So when we sleep, we process out most of the sensory input we've taken in during the day. And the kind of most significant kind of processing time we have is during our REM sleep, right? Which REM stands for rapid eye movement. And so during that part of our sleep, our eyes kind of flutter back and forth. And that is just a byproduct of both sides of our brain working really, really hard to kind of process information. It's like the brain kind of goes online and both sides are working. And just as a byproduct, our eyes flutter. So basically what Francine discovered is that you can recreate this environment of lighting up your brain by asking you to move your eyes back and forth.
Gotcha. Okay.
So by creating what we call bilateral stimulation, so activating both sides of the brain back and forth, we can kind of create that online environment that makes your brain, if you like, extra absorbent, extra ready for processing information. So that's where EMDR came from. So we kind of target specific moments in time, and then we utilize and we use bilateral stimulation alongside kind of very kind of short bursts of asking the client to sit with that moment, notice the sensations with that moment, and then we pause and we say, what are you noticing? And the client might say, I'm noticing my heart's racing. And then I, as a therapist, would say, yeah, just go with that. Notice that. We'll do some more eye movements. Pause. What are you noticing now?
And what are these eye movements? Is it a is there like a pattern to this, or?
Yeah. So essentially the way it's taught is that I would be sat facing you, which I want to be careful with the microphone, but I would just hold my fingers up like this and I would move my fingers back and forth like that. So this is how it was originally taught. We now, in the age of kind of virtual therapy, there are platforms that you can use where I kind of have controls. A little ball moves back and forth. There's also light bars you can buy. So it's just a big long bar where a light goes back and forth. And we also have since discovered that there are multiple types of bilateral stimulation that are helpful. So not just eye movement. So you can have auditory, beeping back and forth in your ears. We oftentimes do tactile bilateral stimulation. So a client might just tap alternately on their legs, or I even have these little buzzers that the client holds and they just buzz back and forth.
Okay.
So really, the eye movement piece is really only, one component of the possible bilateral stimulation options. It is the, teaching eye movement is kind of teaching fidelity to the original model, the eye movement desensitization reprocessing, but other types of bilateral stimulation are effective.
Gotcha. So what does it exactly do to the brain when you're looking at this light, for example, or hand movement?
So it's a good question. There's still a lot we don't know, right, about the brain in general and specifically how EMDR works. But what we do know is that when we are overwhelmed with sensations, our emotional brain kind of lights up, which is like located in the back, like the brain stem. Our limbic system lights up. And what shuts down is our prefrontal cortex and our kind of rational brain. So we've all been in that situation. We felt overwhelmed with emotion and we just can't think straight, right? Whenever we use that terminology, that's accurate because this part of the brain is lit up. And from an evolutionary standpoint, this part of the brain was the first to develop for us, right? It's like kind of our animalistic
reptilian brain.
Our reptilian brain, exactly. So this is like our fight or flight safety space. This is what lights up when we feel like we're in danger. This part has no purpose.
That's the actual thinking, creative part, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this part, we don't need to be thinking logically, as such when we feel like we're about to die, right? We are just going to respond as quickly and as instinctively as we can.
Yeah.
So what we do know from kind of fMRI studies we've done is that EMDR kind of facilitates communication between this part of our brain and this part of our brain. We see both are kind of activated when EMDR is utilized, and we kind of do fMRI studies. And we see that in the actual processing. So what we do in EMDR is we kind of pendulate between activating, but also using the rational brain. So again, if I ask you to kind of bring to mind a moment in time that, when you think of it, it really kind of activates your system, right? Now we're switching on this part of the brain. We do 20 to 30 sets of bilateral stimulation. I pause and I say, what are you noticing? Now I'm inviting you to use this part of your brain to tell me, right?
So you're fluctuating back and forth.
And we're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So what that does is it keeps the body from being flooded and overwhelmed, because every 20 to 30 seconds or sets or however you want to do it, we're bringing this part back online.
Gotcha.
And so one of the key elements of EMDR is what we call dual awareness. We don't want you just swimming around in the memory, but we want you kind of 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the right now. Yeah. And that's what helps keep the limbic system from being too lit up. And we kind of talk about the window of tolerance, right? Yeah. So this is like how much distress you can manage. Gotcha. We don't want you out here.
Not freeze or
right. We don't want you in hyperarousal or hyperarousal, just because that's not fun. And
it's not comfortable, is it?
It's not comfortable, and nothing good happens there anyway, right? No. We're not, you're not processing at that point. So we want you to be able to notice sensations, and oftentimes EMDR can be quite heavy, for the body. It can be quite exhausting, but it's just a lot of energy that the body's had in there for a long time, and recognizing that it's actually the past showing up in the present, right? That you're in a therapy room and you're very safe and comfortable, yet your body's reacting like you're in the car that crashed 6 years ago. So really being able to notice this is just the past showing up right now. It helps to facilitate the communication between these two sides of these two parts of the brain. Yeah. And eventually what happens is that the brain is able to kind of take that information that has been unprocessed and essentially file it where it belongs, right? Gotcha. Which is in the
memory bank or something. Yeah,
like this was a past event. This happened, but it's not happening right now. And actually right now my body is safe. And so that's where that desensitization, the D in EMD comes in. So essentially, as you continue through that process, you just become more desensitized to the image. Yeah. Or to whatever feels like the worst part. For many people, it's the image. Some people, it's the sound or the smell. So we kind of keep sporadically going back to check in on that image. When you bring up that image now on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is neutral, 10 is the worst disturbance imaginable. How disturbing is it now? Well, now it's an 8. Great. Go with that. Do some more sets. What are you noticing now? What are you noticing now? And we keep going to check in. And again, when we scale it on that 0 to 10, we're lighting up this part of the brain, right? We're asking you to kind of evaluate your own sensations. And eventually we desensitize to a 0. And then the reprocessing, so the R, we're not just going to leave it desensitized, but we're actually going to install something that feels healthier. So now when you think about that memory, what would you prefer to think or feel about yourself when you think of it, right? Gotcha. So it's not rewriting history, but when you think of that image, well, I prefer to feel I'm strong, right? Or I can overcome things, or
I'm empowered or something.
I'm empowered, absolutely. So now we install that. So we take that memory and we pair it with a positive cognition, and we use bilateral stimulation to install that to 7 out of 7, so that with 1 being completely false, 7 being completely true, this statement feels completely true to me now. So when I think of that memory, I don't feel terrified. I feel empowered,
Gotcha. Okay.
That's essentially what it is. And then you just kind of can do that for as many targets as you need to or want to kind of facilitate present moment changes, really.
Yeah. How long does the therapy last in a day? Like, for example, if a person's come up to you and it started like day 1, how long would you do this process?
It's so hard to say. So there are therapists that do intensives in this. So you can kind of come for a weekend and you process like for a significant amount of time, and you can get through a lot of memories. EMDR is 8 phases. So I'm just kind of detailed to you kind of like phases 3 through 6. But before you start any of that, you want to build some resources. So we want someone to have a bit of a window, right, for their window of tolerance. If someone is constantly in fight or flight,
you need to understand that person first.
We need to understand them first, and they need to understand themselves and their body. So if somebody's coming to me and they've never even been able to kind of connect to how they feel in their body or verbalize how they feel, it might take several sessions just to build some of those resources before we can even start to talk about the trauma that we might want to address.
Mm-hmm.
For others who are quite seasoned and are very able to connect, internally, we might be able to start processing on like session 2 or 3.
Amazing.
And then it depends on how many targets, right,
Yeah.
that they want to process. And then within that, it also depends on how complex is that target.
Yeah.
So if somebody's targeting maybe abuse, as a child, and that was one incident, that might take a lot less time than somebody who had a significant history of trauma.
Yeah, big T, as you said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or multiple big T's, or somebody that's still living in an environment or a situation that's quite traumatic. So it really can vary. Research suggests that people will start to notice significant changes within about 8 to 12 sessions. Sessions are anywhere from about an hour to 90 minutes on average. Yeah.
You don't want to push them too much as well, right?
Absolutely not.
Because there's a lot of emotion coming through. Getting overwhelmed.
Well, and of course, we want them inside their window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And they want to be there too. So
as soon as you realize they might be swaying in and out of that, then
we pause.
You pause.
Yep. And they are always in charge. So we kind of decide ahead of time, what's your stop signal? What's your pause signal?
Oh, gotcha, okay.
If you feel like you're outside of that window, we get curious. How do you know you're outside your window? What is it in your body that tells you that?
What's the signals?
What's the signals? What are you noticing? That becomes an educational.
And you can work on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it all becomes part of the process. It's not like, oh, pause, you have to go home now. We pause, we check in. How do we know? We work on some of the, tap into some of the resources maybe we've already got, some grounding exercises, some, mindfulness exercises around kind of safe spaces and things like that. To move back inside the window. And then we say, okay, how do you feel about tapping back in and continuing? Or we pause, for however long is necessary.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting process. I've never heard of this, and it sounds like a very effective way of doing it as well. So essentially what you're doing is, from my understanding, whatever you've said, is you're trying to deactivate the limbic part of the brain. So your neocortex or the prefrontal cortex takes over.
Yep.
So you'll rationalize the thought a lot more.
Yes.
Instead of unprocessing, you're processing.
Yes.
And putting it where it should go.
Putting it where it belongs.
That's what it is in what brain chemistry wise.
Yes.
But it's easier said than done, isn't it? Because we're an emotional being. Like as humans, we can't. We have emotional side to us.
Yes.
More than our rational side, we have irrational side to us, I guess.
Sure.
And that's where it becomes problematic, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, we are geared for survival. Our nervous system is wired for survival. So we are, to kind of pull from polyvagal theory, which is a whole kind of different, an incredible approach to like the mind-body connection. We are always engaging in co-regulation. So our nervous systems are always kind of scanning the room. We're always scanning for safety, right? It's like when we walk into a space, we instantly know.
Yeah, is it safe or not? Yeah, that's the first thing you would do, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Does my body feel safe? Is this person a safe person to be around? That's your nervous system. That's not something that they've told you, right?
No.
That you can just sense whether someone feels comfortable or safe. That's your nervous system, and you're wired for that. Yeah. So we are wired for emotional fluctuation. But just sometimes some of those events or moments in time kind of stay unprocessed, and then our body kind of gets stuck, if you like, in that preset or in that moment, and it just keeps showing up in the right now, and that stops you from living the life you want to live.
Yeah, it just stops you, doesn't it? And you become a different person as well.
Yep.
You're not who you are. It's just the emotion taking over.
Yes.
Where does amygdala come in here? The amygdala hijack. Is it related to this as well?
Yes. So it's kind of part of that same idea, right? So when we talk about the amygdala, we often talk about, that's kind of that highly emotional, kind of state.
Yeah.
So that amygdala hijack is really anytime, we feel completely overwhelmed, it's that fight or flight space. And that is, how often do we hear kind of, I blacked out, or I just don't remember, or either that, or for some people when they experience a traumatic event, everything goes in slow motion, right? It's like the only part that really is necessary in that moment is that reptilian brain, is that amygdala, and that hijack is real. Like it overrides everything else because it's going to structure that hierarchy of survival. So that's often how that amygdala kind of gets referred to, and how it plays a part.
It's very interesting, isn't it? The brain science and brain chemistry is just crazy. And then us being I call myself a chemical soup. That you have brain processing stuff and then is feeding so much chemicals and whatever electricity through our nervous system. It's just crazy how, when you think about deeply how humans are wired,
Yes.
it's just crazy, isn't it? It's
Yes.
just so much going on.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's we know so much now. We know so much more than we used to. There's a lot we don't know, but we know more than we used to. And I really, really feel and wish and hope for the future that we can start to teach this at an age appropriate level much younger.
Exactly.
Because,
that's what I was going to touch on, like
right,
kids.
Yeah. We need to, because if we don't know about ourselves, we were learning so much about the world, but to not know enough about ourselves, and our own body, it's like that's a fundamental flaw, I feel like.
We get taught on about stuff that are not relevant. It might not be relevant as well, but these are the relevant stuff that always comes in, bites someone later on in life. And my question is, kids nowadays, that there's the ADHD and stuff. It's called a disorder, right? Like hyperactivity disorder. And disorder is, when you Google disorder, it's just a confused brain and stuff like that. But how can someone, or kid, or so be like adult, how can someone diagnose themselves and kind of have this awareness that, you know what, I might need help, that I might be going through some stuff. Like, it could be depression, it could be early stage of depression or anxiety. How can someone, are there like symptoms and signs that people can look to and then realize, okay, I might need help?
Yeah. Are you referring
like self-diagnosis
to ADHD specifically, or just
or
diagnosis
general like trauma as well?
Yeah. Oh, of course. So, yeah, I know there's tons of resources online, and maybe we can kind of add some of those to the footnotes of this. Some of the more reputable sources for, diagnosis. I know in the States we use the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And that is, but that can be, it's not always particularly user friendly, should we like. So it's good for clinicians and professionals, but for the lay person, it might be a bit dense and overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I know there are some websites that kind of lay it out a little easier. And no two, disorder, it's arbitrary, right? Yeah. What is a disorder? What is a disorder in the UK isn't necessarily considered a disorder in parts of Africa or South America.
It's all about languages, isn't it?
Well, and it's all contextual. So what is abnormal is socially determined. Yeah. And also culturally determined as well. Yeah. So we always want to keep that in mind, that really, when I think of, what is abnormal or what is a disorder or what is disorder, is what doesn't serve you. So if there are parts of your life that you feel like are getting in your way, then there's a chance that might be something worth exploring. So somebody might have a lot of symptoms of depression and feel very content in their life. And so we don't want to force that person to adjust, or do anything differently. But what I would say is, in terms of depressive symptoms in general, we all experience symptoms of depression, or depressive-like symptoms over time, over periods of time. I think the most recent study I saw said that in a lifetime, around 1 in 2 people will meet the criteria for symptoms of a mental health diagnosis. And I think it's something like 1 in 3 every 2 to 3 years or so. So we all kind of move through, because of life, we can all meet criteria at certain periods of time for generalized anxiety or, mild depressive symptoms. But really what we're looking for when it comes to a diagnosis would be, and I don't want to kind of speak outside of my scope, but generally what separates something from just being situational, from maybe being more worthy of like a full diagnosis, would be the length of time, right? So with depression, for instance, we can kind of go through days, where we feel quite low and feel quite sad. But if it's weeks, right, or months at a time, and we continuously feel very low, might be a good indicator, right, that we want to speak to a general practitioner, or we want to speak to a mental health professional about that. With depression, it looks different for everyone. Some people have very high functioning depression, where they can get up and go to work every day. They can do all their tasks, right? But when they really deeply check in with themselves, they feel a deep sense of hopelessness.
So when do you know that you need help? At what point? You'd be like, because it's a it's not as simple. I guess it's quite subjective as well. Might depend on
very subjective, depends on the person. But again, as a general rule, I would say if you are able to identify
those
that
points,
your emotions or that your behaviors are roadblocks to you being able to get to where you want to be, right, or do what you want to do, then there's roadblocks there.
Yeah.
And that's going to vary from person to person.
Yeah.
But as you look at your life, if there's any emotional state or any behavioral state that you feel, whether that be like my mood varies a lot, or I drink too much, or I never want to socialize with people, and if you feel like those ways of being are prohibiting you from getting to where you want to be or feeling how you want to feel, go speak to someone. Because anyone can benefit from therapy. You don't have to have mental health issues, and I'm a huge advocate for, therapy shouldn't be it shouldn't be the last line of defense.
No,
right. It should be
done
very
early.
preventative. Like normalizing, talking about how you feel is what prevents us from getting to these later stages of meeting diagnostic criteria. So, I'm a huge advocate for that. So anybody can benefit from therapy, but certainly if you feel like there are aspects of the way you live your life that are considered socially abnormal, or provide disorder or provide disease to your system, go get checked out.
Checked out. And I think the biggest problem that people have, or I would have, let's say if I'm suffering from something, is me going and I think is the way society sees us is the biggest problem. So if I say I've got a mental health issue, for example, and if I come and tell you that I've got a mental health problem, you not being a therapist, just like my friend, or it could be a family member, they would look at you in a very different way. From that point on, your life becomes different, because they might see you as a crazy, mentally, crazy person. So their treatment towards you becomes a lot different. Right. They might distance you. All this stuff is very scary for someone to actually come up and own that they've got, I might need help. Owning up to that, I might need help, is a big thing. And this is, I think, the biggest problem people have, is that they're not ready to have this social boundary when put in place for them. So how can someone overcome this? And it's like a judgment thing. You're gonna get judged for saying or coming out and saying, like, I've got mental health issues. How do you deal with judgmental people like that?
I think there's a responsibility on all of us, every single one of us, to normalize saying that you need help, or saying that something feels hard. I think anytime we respond in that way to somebody else, or we teach our kids that it's okay to respond that way, we are perpetuating that approach. But I also think, mental health is no different than physical health. You wouldn't feel ashamed to say to someone, I've been having some physical health issues recently.
It's just a normal thing, right?
People go, oh man, I hope you get it figured out, right?
I hope you get well,
suddenly
recover
if you say, I have a behavioral, I have a mental health issue, suddenly there's something about that means, you must be a psychopath.
Exactly.
Right? And it's the scope is very large, right? If you said to me, I have a physical health issue, I wouldn't assume you're dying, right? I'd assume maybe you've got like sore knees or a stomach ulcer or something.
You twisted your ankle or something.
Right, exactly. And the same should be true with mental health. If someone says, I'm struggling with my mental health today, that doesn't mean I'm gonna, I'm having hallucinations, or I'm, really, 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 really suffering. That might just be, I feel really anxious today.
Exactly. This is what I'm trying to say. There's a scale, and people take mental health to not 0 to 100. It goes straight to 100.
Right.
You see what I mean? There's not middle ground anywhere. There's not 10 or 20 or...
Right. And it shouldn't be, again, even the way we talk about it, we wouldn't say, I've got physical health issues, right? We'd say, I've got a headache, or I've got a stomach ache. And we normalize that. And we should normalize, I have anxiety today, or I just feel really low today, or I feel really overwhelmed today. Though it shouldn't be, I have a mental health problem. You wouldn't use that language with physical health.
It's quite vague, isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very vague. And the more vague we are with it, the more kind of hush we're making it seem. So normalizing the language around it, not only for ourselves, but within our workplace, within our society, within our friend group, that we can normalize that language, because everybody has physical health issues. Everybody has mental health issues. There is no one on this planet who doesn't have emotions, right? And there is no one on this planet that hasn't been overwhelmed by their emotions. And just because you don't meet criteria for a diagnosis doesn't mean you're not experiencing mental health issues.
Exactly.
So I think the responsibility is on all of us to normalize the way we talk about it, and then and kind of use the language.
I think the problem is the definition of the word itself. Like when we say mental health, we kind of separate the two out, and we put mental as one thing and health as the other thing. And then mental, being what we know, mental is crazy, psycho, right? And then I think that's what people do. I think that the fundamental definition that we understand mental health as is wrong. And,
yes.
And it is not a psychopath or a crazy person trying to fix their health. It's just someone with some emotional problem trying to overcome and manage that emotion, isn't it? That's what it is.
It's all of us, right?
Yeah, it's all of us.
It's all of us.
And it's everyday thing as well.
Yes.
We all feel something.
Yeah,
and
we all feel, and we all need, we are connective creatures by nature, right? We do not, the reason the human race has survived as long as it has is because we're a collective species. We have to be in a group.
Yeah.
We survive best in a group. And so, we have to connect with each other, and we have to kind of share those experiences. And that there is, to me, it's just, the more I know and the more I work with people, like everybody has mental health challenges.
And I think it's more accepting that there is, all of us suffer from it. Everything, it happens to everyone. You know what? How can we solve it going forward? I think that's the approach we need now, I think, because we've talked about it enough and we understand what it is now.
Yeah.
It's moment that we try and, fix this going forward. Okay, we understand it. Now what we can do as a collective, as you said, it's a collective approach. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has to come from kind of bottom up and top down, right?
Yeah.
So I do see a lot more communication around it now than there was even 10 years ago. When I look at things like what Prince William and Prince Harry have been doing, which Prince Harry actually did. He showed himself receiving EMDR on TV. I think it was on the Oprah Winfrey show or something in the States. So that did huge things for the EMDR community. I mean, I spoke with many other EMDR clinicians whose just email inbox was just blowing up after that, with people looking for those services. So the impact of, I guess, high visibility people normalizing and speaking on their own mental health challenges, just as they would physical health challenges, right? Normalizing that communication. I think that's that kind of top down approach that those people and those industries and those environments that are visible need to be encouraging and normalizing those conversations. So in the workplace, in friend groups, in schools, on TV, it needs to be normalized. But then from that bottom up approach, I think, as adults, as we become parents and we are bringing little people into the world, that we're normalizing those conversations, that we're including kind of felt sense experiences, that we're not, that we're educated on what trauma is. And we're educated on how to prevent, and we can't prevent trauma. We can't, because trauma is an inevitable part of life.
No.
But we can certainly choose our language so as not to promote shame. We can certainly think through our choices and say, if I have the choice to do this thing or that thing, how can I do this thing and be supportive? We cannot eliminate trauma, but what we can do is heal it from a very early age on by getting down in those little people's, faces and saying, I'm right here with you. You're not on your own in this, and I'll work through it with you, and normalizing struggles, right? Normalizing challenges, normalizing that emotions are hard and that we all have days that are difficult, and it doesn't mean you're loved any less, or those types of, normalizing that. And then from, as soon as kids start school, when we're learning about our ABCs, we should be learning about our bodies. And I do see that too. My kids go to a wonderful little preschool, and I see them, having that communication around what are emotions. We all have big emotions, and that's great. But I do also think that, when they need it the most, which might be high school or secondary school,
that's when it needs to be.
It goes by the wayside. There should be a whole mental health class in school, that's as important as math, science, and English. And maybe that's a little bit idealistic on my part, but
I think you're right.
Huge.
You're right. It is. I think it's more than maths, science, and geography and stuff like that. People need to know how to manage their emotions. People need to know what is happening in their body, their brains. You see what I mean? Everything needs to be taught at very early stages as well. And my question is, is there a certain age requirement for someone to see a therapist?
Absolutely not.
as low as whatever. Yeah.
As
Yeah.
early as they
Yeah.
can. You know, I mean, and there are therapists who kind of are specialized in certain areas. So there are play therapists that can work, you know, with children at even kind of pre-verbal age, you know, very young, through kind of early teens. There are specialists that, you know, do wonderful work with adolescents, and then kind of older adults, and even kind of 60 plus, you know, people that specialize in every single kind of age group.
Yeah.
So yeah, never too early.
So what I want to touch on is let's explore the kids' education side. What can we say to our kids or someone that's got a kid? What are the things that we should be talking to them about, and what knowledges should we be sharing with them from the early ages?
Yeah. So I'll just kind of speak to what I know, which certainly isn't everything, and I'm not a specialist kind of child and adolescent therapist, but giving words to emotions is really, really important. So there's something, if you Google it, you can look it up. It's called the emotion wheel. And it kind of identifies names of all different types of emotions. That's really helpful to kind of start out with a young age. And when a child is perhaps having a temper tantrum, right, or they're feeling overwhelmed, really kind of getting down on their level and saying, I notice that you're feeling overwhelmed. I notice that you're feeling sad. I understand that you're frustrated, right? That we're not being punitive or shaming that emotional response, but we're recognizing, I see you and I see that this is how you're responding, you know, and being able to, you know, help a child understand their own emotional state through the lens of that this is normal and that this is not something I should be ashamed of feeling, that, you know, it is developmentally normal for children to have big kind of emotional overwhelm. That's the way their brain and body is developing. So normalizing that from a very young age, giving words that the child can use, and then really being able to understand that within the context of what's socially appropriate, you know, and what's appropriate for the moment, it is important, you know, but that really pulling out the shame is the biggest part of it. That anytime we're made to feel ashamed for the way we feel, that doesn't change the way we feel. It just kind of represses it.
It does.
Or it just makes it show up somewhere else.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So removing shame wherever possible, kind of getting down on the kids' level, using physical touch. You know, so a really tight hug is really, really good for the nervous system. You know, it helps, well, even us, right? Like when we're feeling really dysregulated, physical touch or kind of weight against us is comforting for our system. So that is, you know, just as helpful for a child, you know. Lots of support, lots of, and again, we don't live in an ideal world. So children are going to, you know, we're going to be in families where there's relational issues or divorce or changing of homes. That we can't avoid that. That's life. But there is so much healing that can be done through that, through connection. You know, having a strong adult or caregiver, shall we say, child connection. Doesn't have to be a parent, doesn't have to be, you know, just that child can look to that person and say, that person's got me. Right? I'm safe with that person. That relationship is so incredibly healing and nurturing that it can be the thing that pulls that child through a really challenging time. So, you know, if we're around little people in our lives, you know, letting them know that they're loved, letting them know that their feelings matter, that who they are is important. That can be very protective for children.
That is true. And you talked about talking to kids about failures as well. I saw it with one of your posts. And I think we live in such a goal-oriented society where everything's success, everything's measured. And, you know, you see what I mean? And kids, when they look up to someone, they'll be like, I want to be as successful as that person. But then the step to get there might not be easy. So along the way, they will stumble upon a lot of failures. So what can we tell our kids about the failures? As failure in life is, you know, it's a general thing. But
you know, my personal opinion on that is that school is very achievement driven, right? Which is necessary to some extent and understandable. But generally, as we get older, we are exposed to so much external pressure to succeed, right? That we're not going to be short of that input from the outside world. So if within your family unit, you can be the one that promotes normalizing and recognizing the value of failure, that can be a beautiful kind of counteracting experience to the external pressures that they're experiencing. So I don't remember who it was. It was some celebrity that I saw an interview with several years ago. And they said that one of the best things their dad ever did was every night when they sat around the dinner table, the dad would say to each of them, what was your biggest failure today? What was the biggest failure? And they would each share what their biggest failure was that day. And he would say, great.
Amazing.
And what have you learned from it? What has it taught you? Right? So we're not going around saying, you know, oh, what did you do well today? And what did you do well? Right? That we're saying, what was really hard today? And what did you learn from it? That normalizing that. The other thing I've heard people kind of talk about is talking about your peak and your trough. So what was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? Right. And again, normalizing that both are going to exist and that both are equally valuable in learning something from that. And really what is more important, right, than achievement is what do you learn from it? Because achievement without purpose is empty.
It's nothing.
Right. And that is going to lead to probably further mental health issues that we've all perhaps been in places where we've achieved things that just felt a bit like,
is that it?
What was it? Right. Is that it? Was there any point? So normalizing that purposeful action is really where you're going to feel the most joy. Versus what you did really well at and what, you know, you struggled with. So normalizing failure, if you like.
I think what the word I was looking for earlier when I got stuck was incapability. So failure is seen as incapability most of the time. And that's why kids are so scared to fail. You know, the last thing they would do is not fail because of that, right? You're seen as incapable if you fail. But if you change the definition, as you said, instead of failure being incapability, if it's a lesson that you've learned, then it's a wonderful thing. You'd love, you want to fail, right? Because you can learn more when you fail. If you look at from that perspective, the whole dynamics changes and it becomes fun. Failing becomes fun.
Yes, it does. And I've, you know, said to my kids, like, when you were learning to walk, how many times do you think you fell down? Right? Like, you didn't just get up one day and start walking. You know, normalizing that, you know, making it fun, you know, and really taking as adults, you know, when we're driven to succeed, you know, if a kid comes home and said, oh, I failed a math test today, like, we've got to check in with ourselves with that, like, you know, like, got to check in with that, right? Like, sure, let's talk about that, right? Like, what did you learn from that? What insight have you gained from that? And what would you like to do next? You know, what feels like the next best step? Because absolutely, you know, most things that I would say I have achieved, I have failed a whole bunch, you know, along the way to get to that's what life is.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's a beautiful thing, failing, I think. So, and everyone should fail in a way.
Please
fail.
Please fail.
And explore life, I think. Because we stop exploring life after a certain, you know, we try, we attempt, and when we fail, and then we're like, okay, I shouldn't attempt again, because if I fail again, then it's an embarrassment.
Well, and I it's probably one of those inspirational quotes somewhere on a wall, you know, but that idea of what would you do if you weren't worried about failure? You know, like, what more would you do? What things would you try if you weren't worried about
Everyone will be trying all these crazy stuff.
I mean, we could be light years ahead as a society, you know, if people just said, oh my gosh, like, what if I just did it? What if I just tried? You know, and we always want to kind of risk analysis things, which is important. But I just think there's enough external pressure to quote unquote succeed in whatever that is, that if we can kind of internally within ourselves, within the young people in our lives, really, really normalize and encourage healthy failure, then that goes a long way.
It does. And I speak to people that I work with. They're in their 50s, 60s. They all have regrets because they didn't attempt something in their life. Like, they didn't, you know, because of the shame of failure. They didn't go out and said, look, I'm going to try this. And they didn't. And then now they regret every single moment that they didn't do what they should have done. And you don't want life to be full of regrets. So looking back 30 years from today, you want to tell people that, look, I attempted that. It wasn't successful. Or I attempted that and it was a big success. And I am here today because I attempted that, right? So see failure as an achievement instead of incapability.
Well, and just as you said too, I think it goes back to shame. right? Shame and embarrassment. Shame and embarrassment and fear are going to be the biggest anchors on change.
Yeah.
Right. So from what I know about quote unquote successful people, people who have done a lot of things, they don't see their failures as a representation of who they are as a human.
Yeah.
Right. So when we can look at when something goes wrong and say, yeah, that sucked. It didn't go well, but it doesn't mean I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
Right. Or it doesn't mean I'm stupid.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm incapable. That when we can take the shame out of something,
shame, guilt, all these
we can
emotions.
do so much more. And that again just kind of comes back to that like early, deep recognition and understanding of self. That if we grow up in an environment where we feel like we're worthless, then every little failure is just going to reconfirm.
It's going to be so, I'll be happy to fail all the time.
Exactly. Or I wouldn't try because every time I do, it cuts so deep and reaffirms what I already know about myself. Versus I'm a good person, I'm smart, I'm capable, right? And that these failures, sure, they indicate gaps in my process.
Yeah.
They indicate things that need to be different, but they don't indicate that I'm a worthless piece of whatever, right? And so that's again where that mental health piece comes in.
Yeah.
That when we can have a healthy understanding of ourself and a healthy self-concept, that's the springboard.
It is
to be able to do so much
forward.
more.
Yeah. True. There's I don't know if you've seen the Oscars, the award night. I'm going to talk about that,
Sure.
just a little bit and take your perspective on that. What really happened to Will Smith, and that snap, do you think is trauma related? Some sort of
The trauma therapist to me would say absolutely yes, right? Because if we're thinking, again, I can only speak to my guess and my assumption, but if you were at a professional event in a room full of your colleagues, would your rational brain tell you to go up and hit somebody?
No.
Probably not, right? On something that was televised to millions of people.
Yeah.
Probably not. So talking from that trauma-informed place, I would say that his amygdala was
hijacked, big time.
Yes, right? And that he was overwhelmed with emotion and sensation at that point. Now, was that an appropriate response for, that moment? No. But that was his body's way of responding to what felt like, I'm going to guess, an attack.
Yeah.
And a threat, a major threat. So my suggestion in that would be that he probably could use a bit of EMDR or a little bit of personal, talk therapy to just talk through what was going on in his body at the moment and what did that moment in time mean for him, or mean about him. And my guess would be that, as with a lot of jokes, they are embarrassing, and that's part of the nature of
showbiz
comedy, I guess. And it doesn't make it right, but I do think that there are some environments when I think you have to expect that you might be the punch of, you might be the recipient of a joke.
Yeah.
And
it's the nature of the business, isn't it? For
the
them.
Oscars is that way.
And he is a comedian himself as well. He's done that in the past. Taking embarrassing people in front of thousands of
people. But I can see in that moment, I guess his body was saying, I need to defend, right? I need to defend at all costs. And that was the way that his body chose to react. So perhaps, if anything, that was a beautiful example of why therapy can be so helpful, right?
And what's funny about that is you see the response as he cracked the joke. He was smiling and he was laughing. And then there was a split second where something happened. Either brain processing, he looked at his wife, whatever happened. That's not for us to say. He snapped. He got up, slapped him, came back, and then he smiled again. So you see what I mean? There was a moment where he smiled, and then he smiled back. That means it's crazy. Like, it doesn't really mean that people are going to be angry or aggressive all the time. They are going to quickly snap out of that as well. So which is very dangerous and strange because you don't know who can do what to you as well, right?
Yeah. I think it's so individualized, so everybody's different. But certainly it would just be a really good example perhaps of, from what I'm seeing now, he's saying he regrets that, he's apologized for it, which my hope would be that that's genuine and a genuine apology. And again, another just indication of now that his rational brain is well and truly online again, he's able to reflect on that experience and say, oh my gosh, right?
What did I do?
What did I do? Yeah. But in that moment, that was what felt like the right choice.
True.
And so just again, another...
It's crazy coming from Will Smith. You see him doing a lot of motivational speeches, being a very positive person. If it can happen to him,
absolutely,
it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, it's no different than any of us. You know, we can all look back at a time where not necessarily we've acted out in violence, but that we've done something reactively and responsively, and then a day or two later said, oh my gosh, right? Like what came over me? Exactly. Will Smith is no different than any other human.
No.
You know, he experiences overwhelm like you and I and everybody else. And so exploring that and really being able to get to the root of that is, and I would hope, you know, that perhaps one of the most restorative things that he could do would be to share that journey.
Yeah.
You know, not deep and personal, but to be able to let people know, like, I addressed it, right? And
it's going to be quite crazy. There will be very split people and public on this, I think, because some will support him, saying, "Oh, well done, you've actually come out of this, and you've managed to manage your emotions."
Yeah.
And then there'll be other side saying he's doing it for it's fake, like it's just drama and stuff. Like that. So it's part of the Hollywood.
Sure. Yeah. You just
can't really comment on those. I think
he's a human. You know, he's a human before he's a celebrity. He's a human before anything else, and on that regard, we can all connect to a time when we felt overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And his just happened to be not, you know, out on a Saturday night outside the kebab shop. His just happened to be in front of millions of people, you know. So
that's what makes it even crazy. I guess.
Yeah.
And then you see all these comedians as well. You think they're, you know, a comedian is a person that makes you laugh. So it doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're feeling inside. Like
of course.
You know, you could be cracking jokes outside, but feeling shit on the inside, like crazy. You know, you might be going through very rough times.
Yeah.
And you see all these comedians committing suicide as well. What exactly is going on in their mind when that happens? Like, let's talk about suicide briefly, and then there's a window of tolerance that you talked about, and then there's suicide, which is outside anything. So what exactly happens when people are committing suicide?
So again, I can only speak through kind of the lens that I work with. So I, as a trauma-informed therapist, I would look at suicidal ideation, suicidal tendencies as a response to a problem, right? That it's problematic, right? Suicidal thoughts, self-harm, whatever you want to, you know, any of those kind of maladaptive behaviors, but it's the response to a problem. It's not the problem itself. Suicidal thoughts is a response to something else that feels completely overwhelming. So if somebody feels that they are just completely helpless, that there is absolutely nothing and no one that can help them, suicide is an answer that comes in to solve that problem, right? It's not the problem. The problem is I feel completely helpless. So again, self-harm. You know, if somebody feels that they are not good enough, well, a great way to potentially eliminate that problem is to kill yourself, right? Or to self-harm or to self-sabotage. So not to minimize the, you know, the harm and the heaviness of that subject, but my mind doesn't go to, let's look at ways to stop you trying to kill yourself, or let's look at ways to stop you. Let's look at why that feels like it has to be on the table. Why does that have to be an option? So really looking at what are the deeper beliefs of self that fuel that behavior. So, you know, anybody who has had suicidal thoughts, who has had suicide attempts or completed, you know, they each have their own fuel source, right? There's different fuel source for everyone. So it's not the same for anybody. But again, generally what we see is at some level a deep sense of hopelessness and a deep sense that is the only option, which might come with limited or a self-belief that there is a limited amount of people to talk to about it, or that there is no support or resources, which again can be completely perceived. This person could have tons of resources and help, but if they feel like
it's what they feel,
right, they can't access that. So you know, knowing that there is always somebody to talk to. You know, there are Samaritans, there are helplines that are 24/7. There is always somebody to talk to. And while that somebody might not be able to solve your problems, they can listen. They can get you to the next step and the next step and the next step, and
towards the healing journey.
Toward that healing journey. Absolutely. So yeah, if somebody comes to me and says, I have suicidal thoughts, we'll do kind of some crisis intervention. We'll look at, okay, can you stay safe today and tomorrow? And what types of plans can we put in place to make sure, you're not exposing yourself to unnecessary methods and tools, right? To harm yourself, that perhaps you go stay with a friend or that you're with somebody who can provide support for you. But we're also going to very quickly look at, why does this keep showing up as an answer, right? We're not just going to keep problem solving and say, well, don't try to harm yourself tonight and don't try to harm yourself the day after. We're going to look at what's underneath it, right? Why does this feel like an option? And what other options are there to eliminate, or to kind of address this? And it's generally all the earlier stuff.
It is, yeah. Yeah, true. Okay. I've got two questions which are going to be related. Now, this is to do with your therapy sessions. So let's say someone comes up to you, you have a therapy session, and then you finish that session. What do you do after that? Because there's going to be a residue of the therapy that's still within you, right? So my question is, does a therapist needs a therapy as well?
100%.
And how do you see someone?
Yes,
or you do.
100%. Yes.
So just talk us through what exactly happens when you finish the session and how you process that.
Sure. I think it takes practice, and I think, a new therapist and a very seasoned therapist might have different responses to this. Many times when I see clients, I see several back to back in a day. So yesterday I saw 5 back to back in a day, and then I had one more later in the evening. So many times I don't have time, if you like, to process, because I finish one session and 3 or 4 minutes later I'm into the next session. So I think with practice and time, my mind gets very good at just switching. And again, I will say personally, I'm so invested in my clients that as soon as my client comes on screen, I'm like, great. I remember exactly what we talked about last week. How are you doing with that? Like I'm invested and I'm in, and I'm not thinking about the last client at all. And now at the end of the day, I would say that's when my brain
process kind
of unpacks stuff. So what do I do? When I used to work, full time at the office, I had quite a drive home, about 30 minutes drive. I'd stick on a podcast, I'd stick on music. That was really good for me to just kind of unwind, really kind of take myself somewhere else. Therapy, every therapist should have their own therapist. I think you can't be a good therapist unless you see a therapist, because you are, again, I'm a human before I'm a therapist. So it would be impossible for me to not absorb some of what my clients, give me, or offer me. And I always have to check in with myself that I'm not trying to, for instance, say I was working with a young client who had lost a mother. I would want to be sure that I'm not kind of taking on that mother role, right, with that client and doing and saying things that are outside of my scope. Or say I'm seeing an adult male who abuses his wife, right? That I have to check in that I'm not like getting activated, right, by that, because I'm kind of feeling the wife's pain.
Because it's so easy to suggest stuff, right?
Yeah. And it'd be too easy for me to, we call that transference and countertransference in therapy. So transference is what the client gives you, and countertransference is what you give back.
Gotcha.
It could be the other way around. But either way, it's that kind of the symbiotic relationship. And so absolutely, it's really, really important that, the therapist has their own therapy to work on their own stuff, right? To make sure that doesn't show up and kind of bleed through into therapy sessions, and also to process heavy stuff. I mean,
some of the big T's could be very heavy for you to process.
Absolutely.
And the other question was, how does it affect your personal life? And do you let it affect? I guess you don't want to, but it could creep in as well, right?
Yeah. Not so much anymore. I think when I was first starting, it took me a while to kind of to adjust to that, and how do I process that stuff? As I've gotten older, I don't know, it feels easier now to just move through it and to sit with it. But again, I'm so invested in my clients' well-being, and I'm so passionate about trauma informed, if you like, therapy and EMDR, that's the lens that I look at things through. I don't feel like I'm looking at things through like the lens of a wife or a mother or a friend. Like, I am your therapist. I am your neutral space. I am your safe space. So that's just kind of, guess it's like kind of what I embody. It's like maybe with other people, if they're a banker, they're not going to go home and like count the money in their money jar. They're like, I don't even want to look at money.
Yeah.
So I guess for all of us,
you can't switch off.
Right.
You see what I mean? Yeah. There's still be an element of therapy involved in your system.
Right. But I try to not, and many times I'll have friends say, oh, you're not like analyzing me right now. And I'm like, no,
Maybe.
that takes way too much effort. Like,
it does. Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, I'm not at all.
I don't want to do that.
No, I don't want to do that. No. And again,
unless they really need help, then yes. But
I'll talk to them. But again, I know my boundaries with that. If I'm their friend first. I can't be their therapist.
No.
So, therapists have kind of a strong code of conduct around who they will or will not offer therapy to.
So your friend can't be your therapist?
No.
Right. Is there certain... so who can be a therapist or who can't be?
Yeah.
So are they specific?
Really? So again, and it depends on
country as well.
Yeah, the ethical guidelines, if you like. So my ethical guidelines, based off of where my licensed professional counsellor license in Georgia is that you really shouldn't be offering therapy to anybody that you know.
All right.
Unless there is no other option. Mm-hmm. So there are parts of the States that are extremely rural and you might be the only therapist within 50 miles, right? So you might have to offer therapy to, a parent of one of your kids' friends or something, that might be inevitable. But you should always try to refer out where possible. But no, you have to consider all of the ethical issues. So, for instance, if your friend's a therapist and you say, oh, can you be my therapist? And perhaps you disclose to them that you're having an affair during that session.
Yeah.
You as a therapist can't share that,
no.
right? And so say you're then out to dinner with them the next week.
It's going to be very tough, isn't it?
Very tough, yeah. So any therapist knows, or should know, like, no, like for your own well-being, I wouldn't see someone I knew because that places a burden on me that...
You're too heavily invested.
Invested.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's generally much better for the client and for the therapist that when you leave that room, you don't have any connection or interaction on a personal level between sessions. And that just feels healthiest and safest generally for everyone. Now, there are exceptions. Again, maybe if you have a very specialist technique or approach that the person can't get anywhere else. Like if there are times I have worked with individuals who I knew at some level, it was because we were able to justify why that was necessary. And we would also talk through the ethical roadblocks with that. Like, okay, so if I see you out, at a restaurant, I'm not going to come over to you and say, hey, great seeing you at session last week, right? Like we don't discuss any of that. Gotcha. I won't discuss or acknowledge anything, because that's just to protect the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, true. What was the toughest case that you've dealt with until today? Without giving too much detail.
Yeah, I can't really answer that question without giving too much detail. Big, you kind of touched on it already. Big T traumas, I think are tough for any of us, right? Because we can all, again, I'm a nervous system. I'm a human being before I'm anything else. Yeah. So if somebody was to share something with me about a death of a loved one, right, or a very traumatic death, my nervous system is going to respond to that. Yeah. So the tougher ones are the ones that, where somebody has really, truly suffered, and have been very, very mistreated. So yeah, those tend to be the tougher cases.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know you can't give too much detail. I knew you couldn't. Yeah, which is fine. You can't. Yeah, which is. We just talked about it now, just like 2 seconds before.
Sure.
just check in.
Yeah.
There's a few questions that came up to my Instagram. I just put it up, and there are a few questions. So it's, I think, more general questions. Mm-hmm. So one of them is, what are some of the approaches one could take to look after their loved ones suffering from mental health issues without affecting their own?
Gosh, that's a good question. Yeah. So there's 2 answers to that question. My first answer would be everybody could benefit from therapy, right? So if you are caring for a loved one that has mental health challenges or struggles, there is such thing as like caregiver fatigue, or empathy fatigue, that it can be exhausting and hard and scary and sad to really sit with someone in their pain. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a loved one who is experiencing mental health challenges, don't be afraid to seek out your own therapy, right? Mm-hmm. To really be able to process and sit with anger around that and frustration around that you need to do your own work. To care for a loved one, again, it's different for everyone, but relentless support, relentless unconditional positive regard, right? That when somebody is experiencing, more severe mental health issues, many times it's not a choice that they're making, right? And I say many times, there are things that we can do or we have to do within ourselves to help ourselves. But we're not choosing to be, feeling as low as we are. It's not a choice. And so it can be very easy for us to get frustrated, with that person and, just get up, just do this, just do that, just do. The just do is the hardest part. So, again, a lot of empathy, a lot of support, exploring mini goals. So if somebody, for instance, is experiencing severe depression, tell them to get up and take a shower could be the hardest thing they could possibly do that day, right? So breaking that down into mini goals, like maybe could you get up? Like how can I help you? Like just get up and can we just go for a walk? Don't shower, right? Just throw on some shoes. Let's just go for a walk. Making that stuff into stages. If somebody needs to gain employment, how can we support them in doing that? Because that might feel like the top of a mountain that they don't even know how to get to. Helping them get to a general practitioner, helping them get to a medical professional who can help them start to explore, is medication helpful? Where can I get therapeutic services? There are several really, really great kind of organizations within the UK that you can reach out to. You can go to the BACP, which has great resources for therapy and licensed therapists. I will say go for someone who is licensed, go for someone who has an accreditation, ask what bodies are you accredited under, because unfortunately, and this is something that I really want to emphasize for all your listeners and for anybody, is that you don't have to be licensed in anything to be a therapist in this country. You could go tomorrow and say, I'm a therapist, and hang a little board outside your house and have people come in and receive therapy from you, which is shocking.
Wow.
But it's true.
Wow.
And so be very cautious and ask questions of your therapist. Ask where they trained. Ask what continuing education they're doing to continue to advance their knowledge. Ask what accredited bodies they're with. Ask what ethical guidelines do they follow, because you do want to make sure that you're reaching out to somebody who has education in this field, because things like life coaching, while I'm not against it, there are some excellent life coaches. Anybody can call themselves a life coach. And that kind of opens up a whole world of possible, scary situations. So to answer that, if you're going to kind of help a loved one seek support, be knowledgeable and be critical in the way that you approach that to find the right fit for them.
The right solution, isn't it?
UKCP is another really good one as well, that has accredited licensed clinicians. Psychology Today, www.psychologytoday.co.uk, has some great options as well. You can see pictures of people you can put in your postcode and it'll kind of show you who's in your area, what they specialize in. So you can really kind of narrow it down. Obviously there's the NHS as well, so you can kind of get services through them. I know there might be a bit of a wait list for that, or I think there's kind of certain services you can access at certain times, but be alongside them in being the solution. Get them access to resources, and you don't have to carry the weight of that on your own to be their sole person, because that's a heavy burden to carry.
Okay. I think we missed out this question earlier and I just remembered it. So we're going to slide it forward. So is it easier for a kid to process trauma or an adult?
Good question. Research would suggest generally it's easier for children to process trauma because their brains are so plastic, right? And there is so much, their neural development is changing so fast that if you think about how quickly a child can learn a new language compared to an adult, it's very similar with trauma. So children, when they are helped, to process that trauma if necessary, right? through talking about it, offering that support, EMDR, potentially if necessary, they tend to move through that very quickly.
Really?
Yeah, they can really move through. And also because they don't have a lot of, generally the younger the child, the fewer kind of negative experiences they've had before it to feed into that. So again, if you were an adult and you were going through a divorce, what you really kind of felt at your core about yourself is like, I'm a terrible person, right? You might have had a lot of previous experiences that also feed into that belief of self. A young child doesn't have a lot of earlier experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can, process that experience and help create a more adaptive, healthy viewpoint on it, they don't really have probably a lot underneath that to fuel it, if that makes sense. So generally when I've worked with younger children, they fly through trauma processing with me. With EMDR very well. Now they can take a little longer to get to the stage of processing, right? Because again, if they don't have language for how they feel, or if they're nonverbal, or if they're very cautious of me, that can take a little bit longer to kind of build that therapeutic rapport. But generally, once we start processing, they can process really fast. Yeah.
Okay. So it's better to seek help as early
as
possible.
Early as possible. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of not even kids, like when they grow up, they realize they've been sexually abused, and then it comes back, right? And it's not too late to seek help, but as early, if you can come seek help as early as possible, is much more beneficial for you. And you can heal better. And
anybody can heal. Anybody truly can heal, but just with the plasticity of our brain early on, we have to. EMDR helps to kind of establish new neural networks, if you like, new ways of thinking and feeling about ourselves and the world. And children, as you know, can do that real quick. Adults, it takes a little longer. It's like learning that new language. So their brains are kind of a sponge. So they are ready to learn new information, whereas adults, it's kind of like repaving old roads, if you like, sometimes.
It is, and you're trying to dig deep as well in your memory bank.
Right,
I think we're very, very close to the end anyway. I've got one more stuff that I want to ask you. Which is, or was, now I've just gone out of my mind. Spiritual side. Do you meditate? And is meditation a technique that people can use in their day-to-day practices as well?
Sure. So I don't meditate in the traditional sense. And I think that when we think of meditation, we think of like sitting cross-legged, like
floating in the air,
like sitting on a mountain somewhere, like I don't have enough silence in my life to be able to do that. Unfortunately, I have 3 kids. It's always loud and busy. But meditation sits under the bigger umbrella of mindfulness.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And mindfulness is very, very powerful and very necessary for kind of introspection and just knowing self. And I engage in a lot of mindfulness. Mindfulness exercises, I teach them to my clients all day long. So I do them alongside my clients.
Okay.
I think they're necessary, right? To be able to check in with ourselves. Like, okay, what am I feeling in this
Is it
moment?
more with emotional mindfulness? Being aware of what you feel, right?
Yeah, being aware of what I'm feeling. But not just that, but being aware of like, what am I aware of?
Yeah.
Right? Like what tells me, one of the exercises I might do with a client is like just bringing awareness to the right now.
Yeah.
So even something as simple as, when you check in with yourself right now, what tells you that you're here?
Yeah, I'm freezing at the moment, so
sure,
that's what tells me.
Yeah, I'm holding it now. So like maybe it's your hands, right? Maybe it's the sound of my voice. Maybe you're aware of like the shadows on the walls. What tells you that you're here? All of that is mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is any time we're aware of the present moment. What's happening right now? And then right now, right? So that's mindfulness. And then meditation is kind of what sits underneath that, right? And that's just more intense, right? So I don't meditate, but I engage in a lot of mindfulness, and I encourage everybody to do that, like just to take time to slow down and just bring your awareness to the right now, because there's so much you could learn about yourself if you allow yourself to do that.
Okay. Is there certain books that you recommend for people to read on, like, could be Power of Now or something like that, like mindfulness or anything that you read? Sure.
So I would say anything by Gabor Mate is incredible when it comes to learning about trauma-informed processes. he has some great books on, there's one called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which is about trauma and addiction. There's one, what was the other one? Anything by Gabor Mate is great. Bessel van der Kolk is kind of considered one of the fathers of the trauma field. And he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. That's an incredible book for really understanding how trauma is held in the body. What was the other one I read recently? I'll have to put together a list for you because there's several that...
Yeah, I'll stick it on.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of ones that aren't kind of clinician focused that could be really, really helpful.
But yeah, exactly. Not too intense for people to read as well.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You can send me the list.
Even any kind of intro to mindfulness, just being able to recognize mindfulness and anything you can look up around ACT or acceptance and commitment therapy is also a really beautiful kind of intro into mindfulness, based kind of resources and tools for just noticing our own internal experience, whether that be intrusive thoughts, intrusive sensations and feelings, and just noticing them without feeling like we have to do something about it, but just observing them. Even just from a very, very kind of top level introduction, something like the Calm app, right? There are like mindfulness apps. Headspace.
Insight Timer. Yeah.
Exactly. Those type of things are really nice for just an intro into what does it feel like in my body to just slow down? What does it feel like for me to just check in, right, with myself and stop thinking about what I'm doing tomorrow or what I did yesterday or just being in the right now. Yeah. Those can all be really kind of lovely intros as well.
Sounds good. And then the final and the last question is, if I can't afford a therapist, how should I deal with my anxiety or if I'm feeling depressed, how should I deal with it?
Yeah, sure. So again, NHS has resources. Now, I can't speak to in your local area how accessible those resources are. Sometimes there's a wait list, sometimes there's not. So check in with NHS resources first, obviously that they're free. Check in with local support groups. There are so many local support groups. Like check on things like Facebook and Instagram to see like what's going on locally in your area in terms of mental health support. Sometimes churches offer like a housing spot for different support groups, and support networks. So there is support out there. There are, I know, and again, I can only speak to what it is in the States. There's an organization called BetterHelp in the US. I'm sure there's an equivalent of it over here. And it's like virtual therapy, but it's kind of like you pay like a small amount, but you pay it monthly and you can have like unlimited sessions, something like that. So check in to see if there's anything outside of individual one-on-one talk therapy. Sometimes group therapy is much more affordable. And really, really helpful. There are so many great mental health charities, out there, Mind, being just the first one I can think of, but that they offer events, they offer support, resources, booklets, information. So reaching out, you don't, unfortunately, many people do have to pay for private services and it's not cheap and it's unfortunate that it has to be that way, but that's not the only way to access resources. And again, download an app. There are some really great mental health apps that invite you to kind of check in daily. How am I feeling? What is it in my body that tells me that? What are the words that go with
Start
that?
with basics.
Like just bringing a little bit of self-awareness, because that might help you too know where you want to focus on. So say you do a bit of reflective work and you're like, actually, I do have some deep trauma stuff I want to work on. Now I know who to go to.
Okay.
So on and so forth.
We've come to an end. Is there going good? All good?
All right.
Anything else you want to say?
No, I think that's about it.
It's quite heavy, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, this is not for me.
For me, it was quite heavy. I think there's a lot of processing that I need to do.
My brain's exploding now.
Yeah. No. So much information, I think, but it was a really good one.
Yeah.
It's so good that, and as I said, people are ignoring this aspect of life, and I think they should start exploring and understanding mental health in a lot more depth as well.
Sure.
I know this was a very quick one. I know there's millions of questions that people we can ask.
Yeah.
But time is always limited.
Yeah. So, and I'm happy to answer questions too. So if people want to reach out to me directly,
do you want to put give your details as well to
Sure. How my website is findingfreedomtherapyservices.com, www findingfreedomtherapyservices.com, and Finding Freedom Therapy Services on Instagram. So you can always send me a message on there. Or you can look me up on Facebook, Rebecca Huls, LPC. You should be able to find me on there as well.
Okay. That's how I'll find you.
Yes. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So, I'm always happy to answer questions or point people in the right direction for if they're looking for a therapist. I can always happy to help people find someone.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for letting us do this.
Sure.
Appreciate
you're welcome.
you.
It's
and
fun.
Thank you, team, as well. Thank you very much, man. Thank you. Any questions? No questions. All right. Cheers.
Good?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a wrap.
Ooh.
Wow. It's hour and 25.
Was it really? Oh my gosh, that went quick. It did get cold in here too.